As we go through talking about how to optimize our monetization experience, we introduced the framework of perceived value greater than perceived price plus friction in the last lesson. In this lesson, we want to dive a little bit deeper on perceived value and its different components. Perceived value is how the user interprets and perceives the value relative to other things. So what we're trying to do is make sure that the user perceives a much greater amount of value than the perceived price and the friction. If that happens, we end up converting a user to a paying user. The key question here is, how do we increase that feeling of value being received? Well, let's take a look at an example of Spotify. They've got a few different things going on depending if you're a free user, a returning user, or a number of other components. So if you're a new user, you might get an offer similar to this. You get a 30-day free trial, but a credit card is required. You could also get an offer similar to this. If you're already an existing free user, you'll get a 7-day free trial, but no credit card required. Or if you've already done a free trial, but gotten to the end of that free trial, they might offer you an extension of a 30-day free trial, but they then require the credit card at that point. So what is Spotify doing in this case? Well, they're playing with different components of this framework of perceived value, perceived price, and friction. What we're doing is that they're keeping the price the same, but depending on your user and the context that you're coming from, they might be asking for a credit card or not asking for a credit card, which is playing with the different level of friction. But in return, they're also playing with the amount of value or perceived value they're giving away. So if they require a credit card, or if you're coming in with very little context about what the Spotify product is, they're increasing the perceived value of that paid tier by giving you a 30-day trial rather than a 7-day trial. But if you already are familiar with the product, right, they might reduce the length of that trial, but not require a credit card. So once again, they're balancing all of these components out and playing with them. So the question is how do you increase that perception of value without actually giving more of the paid product away? Well, there's three different components, right? The first part of perceived value is an emotional component. So the users are asking, what feeling am I gaining as the result of purchasing this? Emotional benefits contribute much more to perceived value in the B2C context versus the B2B. In the user psychology module, we're going to talk about all of these different types of emotions around core desires, things like money and economic desires, knowledge, social approval, companion, and sex, and how we actually tap into these emotions to increase people's user psych level and their perceived value across our product. But the second part of perceived value is that we would want to highlight the functional components of the product. So the question that the users are asking here is, how much money or revenue or cost reduction will I gain by adopting this product? So the functional benefits contribute much more to perceived value in the B2B context versus B2C. And the third component is around accrued value. So the longer that they get to experience or touch the product, the more perceived value builds. Think about a product like Dropbox using the free product, storing a lot of files. They're building that perceived value so that by the time you get that paywall, you already have this value built up. You've already invested in the product. And so that perceived value is going to be greater and that perceived price is going to be lower. So this is perceived value, how a user perceives the value of the product relative to other things. There's three components of perceived value: emotional, functional, and accrued, and we can play with any one of them to increase that perceived value. And the third is we can change perceived value relative to the perceived price, right? So as perceived price increases, we can increase that perceived value to increase conversion. In the next lesson, we're going to talk a little bit more about perceived price.